And I got a phone call, and he had had a major heart attack at work. And he had a defibrillator placed, and it had shocked him actually 29 times, trying to get his heart back. So he was already at the hospital, so Scott came and met me, and we went. And so they basically came and told us that, he's, I don't know what that machine is that pumps for you, but it had been doing the work for like 80 minutes, and his heart still hadn't come back.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Dare to Live podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Holloway, and I'm so excited to be introducing a brand new season for you guys on YouTube, as well as all my other podcast outlets. I'm just so excited to be introducing this to you guys. And this season is titled Beauty from Ashes, where I have guests on to share how God brought them out of terrible situations and turned it into something beautiful. And so as I was preparing for this episode and for this season, God gave me the idea like really early on to do this season, and I just knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't have any really personal connection truly to the theme that I was given. And so just like a personal story, I guess, which plays a factor into this season, is about a month before I started the Dare to Live podcast in general, my grandpa actually passed away on my birthday. And so it was obviously very difficult for me. And I was, when I found out that he had passed away from cancer, I was actually by myself. When I got the phone call, I was alone. And I think it really affected me that I was by myself. And it wasn't until several months later, on New Year's Eve actually, that I was in my office alone, and I was working on a project for the podcast actually, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of grief and loneliness that I don't think I had processed yet since his passing. And I just remember feeling like I was all alone when my grandpa died. And I just had this overwhelming sense of sadness just come over me, and I just started crying. And I just felt, as soon as I thought I was all alone when my grandpa passed away, I had this immediate response from the Holy Spirit that was, no, you weren't. I was with you. And I just started sobbing and just kind of had a moment with God. And it was just a realization for me that in one of my darkest, saddest moments of my life, finding out that my grandpa passed away, the Lord was with me. And as I sit down to talk with all of my guests on this season, and they share about their darkest moments, it's just a reminder each week that we're not alone in these moments. And so I also feel like my personal story of losing my grandfather and then starting this podcast, it gave me a sense of compassion and empathy for my guests that I don't think I would have had if I did not experience that loss that I experienced last year. And it's allowed me to connect with my guests on a different level, a more understanding level, because of the emotional connection that we share in grief, in loss, in trauma. And so I really hope, and my prayer and hope is that each episode speaks to you all, and that you just know, no matter what you go through hearing these stories, that you're never alone when you go through the hard times in life. And so I'm just so excited to introduce my first guest, Crystal Anderson. She was actually my 4th grade teacher, and we just kept in touch all these years, and she has an incredible testimony that I just can't wait for you guys to hear. Okay, so Crystal, just tell me a little bit about your upbringing, like how you met Scott, and kind of what got you into like the adoption process, and like what got you thinking about adopting and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, sure. So I was raised in Richmond, Virginia. So in a Christian home. I went to church all my life, and had a brother and a sister, and all was well, no big issues or anything like that. I went to Liberty University for college, and that's where I met my husband, Scott. And we got married 2 years later and decided we both loved children, wanted to have maybe 3-4 children. So we had our first about a year and a half after we were married. So we had 3 girls, and then we got a surprise. We got a boy. And then, so because we really just wanted the 3, and then we ended up with Josh. So we had 4. And so that was good. We actually moved from Virginia to Maryland with the 4 kiddos in a homeschool. And so we were there. And after Josh, we decided not to have any more children. I don't really remember praying about that. I just remember being overwhelmed with 4 kids. So I was not really, looking to have more. But when Josh was 3 and Alyssa, our oldest, was about 8 at that time, and I just kind of felt this nudge of, oh man, we really should have had more kids, especially in the homeschool realm. Everybody has tons of kids, and I only had 4. So only 4. So I mentioned to Scott about maybe we should have had more kids, because we kind of made that a permanent decision. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, if you're looking at me to go do something here, we're not getting a reversal, anything like that. So I was like, okay. And he was like, but we could adopt. And I was like, not what I was thinking exactly, because I don't know how you view adoption, but I never was really around a lot of families that adopted. So I heard things on TV, or you saw this show where like people adopted and they had such a big heart and they adopted these kids, and then they just were terrors and it was terrible and this and that. And I was just like, I have 4 kids. So it's not like we needed, like infertility or anything like that we were looking. So I just put it in the back of my mind and kind of prayed about it, but really not real open to it. And one morning in my devotions, I came across the scripture, Proverbs 24:3-4. And it says, by wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. And I remember that moment, God just speaking into my heart, and I was looking down the hallway where my kids' bedrooms were. And I remember God just whispering and saying, sorry. And God just said, you have some beautiful treasures, but one is going to be rare. And so I knew at that moment that God wanted us to adopt. So I tell Scott, oh yeah, like we're supposed to adopt. Like, I know God told me this. This is great. And so we started the process, and I was going to, we were looking at China. So we're going to adopt from China. We're going to add a little Chinese girl, because if I have to adopt, it's going to be this cute little, thing that I can dress up. And so we did all that. We did paperwork. We talked to references, did the whole thing. And then the morning that I was sending the application in with the money and everything, I called Scott, and I was like, hey, gonna send it all in. I'm so excited. And he said, no. And I was like, what? And he said, I don't think it's the right time. Like, I don't feel right about it. So I was very frustrated, but I was like, okay, we have to be in this together. I knew God had put that in my heart. I knew that Scott wanted to adopt, but he was just holding back. And so that was about 3 years later that we moved to Georgia. And that's kind of how. So when we moved to Georgia in May, I went to a homeschool event like in October, and these homeschool moms were talking about this little boy. He was a 10-year-old Haitian boy, came to the States, and he needed a heart transplant, and they needed a home, and this church had brought him on the stage and had said, we need a home for him or he'll have to go back. So I came home. We'd only been in Georgia a few months. I told Scott everything that happened that day, which, you're just trying to make conversation because you don't really know many people. And I was like, yeah, this church has this little boy. He's like 10. He's from Haiti. He needs a heart transplant. And so my husband says, well, did you call about him? And I said, no. Why would I call about him? And he said, "You want to adopt, right?" I was like, "Yeah." And he was kind of quiet. And then he said, "Oh, I get it." I was like, "What?" He said, "You want what you want. You want that little Chinese girl, but you may not be open to what God wants for us." I smacked him. I was like, okay.
You're right.
Yes. Yeah. So I called the next day, called the church, and we set up a time to meet with John Rudy. And we met in Winder, actually, not far from here, at Ruby Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And like right down the road from where we're filming at.
Yeah. So we, the people that brought him from Haiti own the orphanage, but they live here in Jefferson. So that's where we met. They brought John Rudy to the restaurant, and he came in, and he was just frail and just so thin, and he walked in, and they brought him right up in front of us, and Scott and I were standing there, and he just looked up, and when I saw his brown eyes, I just knew that God was like, "That's your rare treasure. Like, he's the one." So we just took him at that point by faith, and it was kind of a journey, just another story about the legal adoption process. Mm-hmm. But from that point on, we knew that he was the one.
So I know you said he had like a heart condition. So what all did he come with when he came from Haiti?
Yeah, so not with too much. So the story for him, he was in Haiti, and what we understood was that his mom and dad had both passed away, and him and his little brother were in an orphanage. They had been there a couple of years, I believe. He was not sick at that time. It was actually a medical orphanage. So the people that lived here that ran it were nurses and that kind of thing. And he developed this heart condition. His legs were swollen, like triple what it should be, and his heart was just failing. So they had moved him in town, and he was in a hotel. So a group came, like on a mission trip, came over to Haiti. And one doctor, Patrice, who is a really good friend of mine now, she took care of him specifically. And when she saw him, she was like, "He's got to get to the States. Like, he's in heart failure." So Sibley Heart Center and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta had actually said that they would take him. He was going to come over for like 6 to 8 weeks, have surgery, and then return to Haiti. But when he got here is when they realized that his heart was worse than it was. So yeah, he came, and then unfortunately, after we took him into our home, the people at the orphanage didn't hang around very long. So we ended up with them with no insurance. There was nothing really as far as, like when we got him, we just got...
Right, like a lot.
Yeah.
So talk to me about like the family dynamic with bringing another child that's older into your family. Like how did that work out with your other kids and your relationship and everything?
So actually it went pretty well. They knew we wanted to adopt. I think they were probably as shocked as we were that he was 10 years old and not 2 or a baby. But they all actually did pretty well. Our son Josh just took him like a brother from day one. Like I look back and I see just the sweetness of that, because there were the 3 sisters, the 3 girls, and then Josh. So he always had his room to himself and all that, but he didn't really care. He wanted to share a room, and he wanted to have all the things. So when John Rudy came, the first night John Rudy came, now we had just been in our house not too long. We had gotten Josh, he was 6, I think, 5 or 6 at this point. He had a nice full-size bed. He had everything was new in his room. And when John Rudy came and spent the night, he got his little sleeping bag and put it down on the floor, not for Rudy, but for him. And he gave Rudy his bed. We call him John Rudy most of the time. Gave Rudy his bed and just always treated him like that. Like he just adored him. Yeah. I think he realized that Rudy was hurting, and I think he was sensitive to what he didn't have, And so, yeah, so he was good. All the kids were. The only one I would say is Krista, who's our second daughter, is only 2 months older than Rudy. So she was 10 as well. So she was like kind of okay with it.
Yeah.
Like she knew that he needed a home, but she didn't know if it should be our home. So he kept, he was with us all the time. And she was so funny because one day she said, "Mom, when is he going to leave?" I was like, he's not going to leave. And so there was a little bit, but for the most part, honestly, it's as if God just kind of gave the whole family that heart for him.
And like growing up, I'm sure like I never met John Rudy personally. I've known Miss Anderson since I was like 9. And I never met John Rudy personally, but like just hearing his story, like I'm sure he had so much going on in his head, like as far as leaving his home to move here, leaving family to move here, and then also having all of these like health conditions and just kind of being in a strange area. So how did he handle that? Like your family is has a strong Christian background, and here this kid is coming from Haiti and doesn't know the family dynamic that you have. So how did John Rudy kind of handle that in your family?
He loved being at our home. I knew that he loved being there. He was at my side all the time. Like if I went anywhere, he was right there. And I know he just was probably scared and knew that he could trust me. I guess he felt like I was, somebody that he could, was there for him. He would not eat any of our food. So that was big. He would only eat noodles that were fried in garlic salt.
So specific.
Yes, because our house smelled like garlic salt, like so much. And then he would take hard-boiled eggs and he would take a dough. Like he would get the salt and the flour and the water and he would make dough and he would wrap the hard-boiled eggs in it and then he would fry them. And it was always the perfect amount of dough. It was just crazy. But his stomach he had a lot of, issues with the foods and also being sick. But finally, after he was there a while, Scott was like, he's got to eat our food. Like he's got to eat. So it took some time. But then once he got on to the American way, he was good to go with that. So we did have that. I think at first it was like the newness and he thought it was really a cool thing. Now he didn't speak a lot of English, so it was more French. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to watch movies in French and this and that, but he understood what we were saying. So it took me a little bit to realize that he knew that what we were saying, but he still, liked to hang on to the French part. But that really didn't take too long. And then we were over that barrier as well.
And what about like just like growing up, like transitioning into a Christian home and just dealing with like all of those issues that he had, and then dealing with like God at the same time, like growing up and getting older.
Yeah. So when he first came, the people that had the orphanage, they were Christians. So I assumed that he knew about God. And so I asked him one afternoon, I was like, "Hey, do you know about God?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "You've heard the name Jesus?" And he said, "No." And I said, "You've never heard the name Jesus?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, God loved us so much that he sent his son to die on the cross for our sins. And, we can ask for forgiveness and we can have, ask him into our hearts." And he said, "I've never done that." And I was like, "Oh." I said, "Do you want to?" And he's like, "Yes." So he did. And then he went to church and, we went Sunday morning. Kids were in Awanas on Wednesday nights and he was fine. No real pushback at that time. As he got older, I think that probably things that were under the surface that we really didn't know about really began to surface. And he was kind of pushing back against that Christian way of a Christian home, and the boundaries we set and going to church and that kind of thing was not really his thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, can you like explain like a little bit more? It's like, and I know we and you talked about it
Yeah.
kind of already. So like, as he like came into adulthood and all of that kind of stuff, like how he struggled with all of that.
So I think what probably led up to that coming to a head, which we'll get to, but it was he coming. So we were told his mom and dad had died in Haiti. He still has brothers and sisters there. So he came not really realizing he was going to stay. So then he gets plucked out of Haiti, plopped into our house. Poor little 10-year-old thing, right? He's like, okay. And so he wasn't sure if he could trust us long term. Like he knew we were taking care of his needs, but are they really here for me? Or like, what's the deal? And the people from the orphanage weren't really around anymore. So he had a lot of trust issues, yes. So when I told him that we were going to start the adoption process, that's really when everything kind of went down, because he was not about that. He would say, I have a mom. You're not my mom. You're not my family. I'm from Haiti, and, on and on. So this just kept escalating over time. So years of this, like we didn't adopt him at that point. We were fostering him basically, but in our hearts we had adopted him, but he was just not about it. And so as he got older, he just kept pushing that back at me especially. And so he had all these walls. I felt like the walls, like I had never experienced a child, like I didn't understand the hurts, I guess. Mm-hmm. Scott and I were raised in Christian homes where we never had any bad thing happen, really. Do you know what I mean? So we thought, we want to have another, God called us to adopt. We're going to add him into the home, and it's going to be fine. We're going to love him through everything, and he's going to love us, and it's going to be fine. It's going to heal all wounds, right? But that didn't happen. So his walls toward me just got worse and worse and worse. And then I started building walls, and I started being like, okay, you want to play this game? Then you want to keep pushing me away? I'll push you right back. And we did not have a great relationship, unfortunately, at certain times for sure. And I didn't know how to respond to him, and I failed to see probably through his hurts and that kind of thing, and I allowed that hurt to hurt me. Mm-hmm. And so he got worse and worse, and then at a point where he was like probably 19 or 20, and he was becoming so disrespectful toward me that Scott had to ask him to leave if he couldn't straighten up. And so he did. He found somewhere to go. Actually, he lived in a basement with a friend. So it kind of escalated, to that point.
And then he moved back in.
He did. So he was gone for a while. We didn't really see him much, but his brother, Josh, kept up with him and would keep us up on things. So he would always go to Josh, not to us. He did, couple years after he left, he invited me to lunch for Mother's Day. And that kind of opened the door for him to be with the family. Like he had missed his sister's wedding, and there's just a lot of things. And he's so stubborn. He was so stubborn. He was not going to, he was going to do his own thing and show us that he didn't need us. And so I don't know how long, maybe 3-4 years went by, and the people where he lived were moving to New Jersey. He tried everywhere to go except home. He was not moving home for anything. He was not going to ask us. But it got to the point where Josh was like, he doesn't have anywhere to go. He wants to ask y'all, but he's just, he's just proud. And so ended up, he did come back to live with us. And so we were very thankful that he did that, because what ended up happening, he was with us. He still was kind of withdrawn. Like he wouldn't eat dinner with us. He ate after us. He still kind of passed us, kind of in the night kind of thing. But he was with us about 10 months, and then he was just really angry with me. I was in his room, and he was at work. I was in his room. I was in the closet because the top of his closet, the shelf, there were some pictures, and I was trying to organize 5 kids' pictures from all these years. And he came home, and I was like, oh, I'll be out in a minute. I'm just getting these pictures, getting these boxes. So I noticed like he was on his bed. And then when I came back the next trip to get some stuff, he was on the floor, kind of in my way. Third time I came in, he was basically at the door with his legs like I was having to cross over him. And I was like, John, Rudy, I am just getting these boxes. I will be out in a minute. And then he just cursed at me. Like he was so angry. And he had never cursed to my face like that. And I was like, oh my word, like, what are we going to do with this child? Like he's been back 10 months and he's still so angry. And, so I go in, I tell my husband, I'm like, you believe what just happened? He's like, so mad at me. All I'm getting is boxes. And so Scott goes and talks to him, and they get into a heated, like, fight. Like, not fight. They weren't, like, fist fighting or anything. Just back and forth. Yeah. And so my father-in-law lives with us, and I went and got him, and I was like, can you come and just like make sure that everything's okay? And they were just going. And then I heard my husband say, me, I am your biggest cheerleader. And then everything kind of got quiet. I had walked away, and I didn't know exactly what was happening, but later that night, I was like, is everything okay? And he's like, yeah. To Scott, he's like, yeah. And I said, he said, did I tell you that when I told John Rudy that I was his biggest cheerleader? Because John Rudy had said to him, you're my problem. And Scott was like, me? I'm your problem? I'm trying to help you get a job, disability, like whatever. Because John Rudy had also had a stroke in Haiti, so his right-handed foot were to the point that he couldn't just go get your average job or whatever. So Scott, so he's blaming Scott, and Scott's like, I'm your biggest cheerleader. So anyway, so later Scott is talking, and he's like, did I tell you when I said I was his biggest cheerleader that he cried? And I was like, no. And he said, when's the last time John Rudy's ever cried, or you've seen him cry? And I said, probably when he first came to our home when he was 10. And he's like, yeah, he cried. And I was like, oh. And I just kind of thought about it. I just thought it was kind of odd. The next day, John Rudy asked me to dinner. He texted me, hey, Ma, you want to go to dinner? And I was like, okay, sure. And so, which is very out of character for him. But he took me to dinner. We talked for probably 3 or 4 hours, had a great conversation. I told him about how, because since our relationship was always, even it was just always just hitting our heads, butting our heads. And I said, John Rudy, I am sorry that I always am so hard on you, and I always come back at you. And I said, because like I knew that we wanted to adopt, and you came and then you like pushed me away. I didn't really know what to do with that. Like I wanted you to be my child like my other children, but it was hard. And he said, I know. And then we got home and got out of the car, and he came and gave me a big hug, which is also out of character for him with me. And he said, hey, Ma. I said, yeah. He said, I know you always say you're sorry because you want to make it right. And I said, yes, John Rudy, because I love you. And he said, I know. And then he walked out, and the next 10 days were good. He talked to me after work, and he watched a movie with the family, and I was like, oh, wow, like, this is great. Like, he's actually, like, maybe something happened in all this that recently went down. And then, so 10 days after that, I went to go pick him up at work and couldn't find him. And I was looking, he worked at a Starbucks in Kroger. So I'm looking, maybe he's shopping, and I got a phone call, and he had had a major heart attack at work. And he had a defibrillator placed, and it had shocked him actually 29 times, trying to get his heart back. So he was already at the hospital, so Scott came and met me, and we went, and So they basically came and told us that, he's, I don't know what that machine is that pumps for you, but it had been doing the work for like 80 minutes and his heart still hadn't come back. And so they tell us this, and then I was like, well, I mean, what do you mean? Like, what's happening? And she's like, well, his heart's not responding, but we're going to put him on an ECMO machine. And I don't know if you're familiar with ECMO machine, but it basically is like a life support where it just will let the heart rest and it pumps for the heart. So we'll put him on the ECMO machine. So they did that, and it's kind of a long story with some of it, but at that point, I will just say that when that happened, I had trusted God like so much for this child, like him not having insurance when we brought him. And God always took care of that. We had a bill one time for like $99,000, and it was taken care of. And it's just like on and on and on and on. So in my mind, I'm like, God's got this. Like, it's good. His heart's going to beat. He always comes in. He comes through with Rudy some miraculous way. I don't even know how, but I just knew that God was going to heal him. And days go by, and it's going, he's not well, and then he's doing better, and he's not doing better. And Scott's like, you need to prepare yourself. And I was like, no. Because God always comes through for Rudy. It's not about me it's never been about me anyway, but it's like God's got his hand on Rudy. And my husband would be like, okay, I'm just saying. And I was like, okay. But we just went through that week, and it just got to the point where like he ended up he got off the ECMO machine, and his heart was beating on its own. He was doing incredibly well, but then he got a fever, and it just stayed at like 102, 103, and could never get it down. And then he developed pneumonia. And I remember praying about the 9th day. I was like, God, you're in the little things. Like a fever, like, is nothing compared to his heart condition of cardiomyopathy and the need for a heart transplant. And the next morning, so the only time Josh ever was with me in the morning when we would go in to see John Rudy and get an update from the doctors. And they're like, well, he's not doing too well, but we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It's going to be fine. I'm like, okay. So we leave the room, and I took Josh down to get coffee or something for breakfast because they were supposed to do another procedure. And I got that same phone number pops up on my phone. You need to come quick. We need you to come back as quickly as you can back, in this room or whatever. So we get there, and they tell us that all of his organs are shutting down and that there's really nothing they can do at this point. So, so that morning, all the family gathered around, and God's answer was to take him. And I did not see it coming. I should have seen it coming. But I had a peace at that moment. Like, I knew that God always does what's best. He always did what's best for John Rudy. Like, he moved mountains to get him from Haiti to our home. And so the 10 days that John Rudy was in the hospital, I started remembering back about all the things that were going down that had happened at home, like the reconciliation. Like, he came home 10 months before, and he had taken me to dinner, and he had cried, and he had like God had been moving in his heart. And I just, as I was trying to deal with the grief and try to process what was happening, I just thought, when John Rudy cried, I really believe that that's when he became broken. And when he was able to receive Scott's love for him, he was able to receive God's love for him. And he had also told me that night when we went to dinner, he said, you know, Ma, when Dad told me that I was his biggest cheerleader, or he was my biggest cheerleader, I got it. And so I just thought, wow, like he got it. And so then when the next 10 days transpire and God calls him home, it was as if God was like, that's all I wanted. I just wanted him to let go and to be broken and to receive me. And I feel like he was just like, okay, I'm ready, you're suffering, it's done.
Yeah.
Like all this was for that. And so that's the spirit that I try to process that.
Yeah. We're crying too. I think when like you're telling me this story, I think of like he leaves the 99 for the one, and it's like he does it for all of us. But in this story that you're telling, he left the 99 for John Rudy.
Yeah.
And like everything he could do to get John Rudy's attention.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll add this too, that the night before John Rudy's heart attack, this is another thing that kept going through my mind during those 10 days. Because John Rudy was stubborn and he wasn't going to church and he wasn't doing the thing, and I didn't really see any fruit in his life. And so I could be sitting here today being like, what was God doing? But God was so gracious. And the night before John Rudy's heart attack, my daughter Jessie, the third girl, she's like, hey Mom, remember when I got saved? I don't know how we got talking about this, but she's like, do you remember when I got saved? And sadly, I was like, were we in Decula? And she's like, yes. She's like, Mom, you don't remember? I was like, I kind of remember. And she said, it was the night that you asked John Rudy if he knew Jesus. And you explained it to him. And I was sitting on the stool at the bar and thinking, I've never done that. So she said, Mom, after you got done leading John Rudy to Jesus, like I asked you to come up to my room, and I did the same thing. That was the night before the heart attack. So it was just like God was so sweet because I have a lot of regrets, and I'm sorry that I had those walls up and reacted the way that I did. But you know what? God still, like, he knew the way I was going to be with John Rudy. You know, he knew how our family was going to be. He knew. And he still chose us.
He knew what John Rudy needed too, like the family to put him in, the parents to give him, and everything. I find it like I love that you're being vulnerable about it, because nobody's family is perfect. We all like to pretend like we all get along and like all our siblings get along and we get along with our parents. But like what you're describing is like a generic household, like kids fighting with the parents and like moving out and big blow up arguments, like that happens in every single household. So yes, you may have regrets because of how it played out, but at the same time, like you're just living every mother's life, you know. So I love that you're being vulnerable about it, because there's probably so many moms out there that maybe they didn't adopt, but maybe they're going through something really similar with their own children. And just hearing you speak on it could help them, give them some insight. And even for the siblings too, like I remember just being so heartbroken for Josh, because me and Josh were the same age, so we knew each other when we were kids, and then like seeing all this happen and knowing that they were so close, and then, you know, just following it on Facebook, like staying updated with your posts and stuff when it was all happening, just being so heartbroken for him. And it's just one of those things. It's like sometimes God does stuff when we don't understand why he did it the way he did it. But I think you have a very beautiful outlook on it, that he waited for John Rudy to understand his love, and then he ended his suffering. You know, because he was in pain here on earth, and emotionally and physically. And he used your family to help mend that relationship with him. I think that's really beautiful. So, and I also find it interesting that, you know, not I mean, what you're describing your relationship with John Rudy as an adopted child is sort of like what you didn't want, like the whole reason you wanted. And I think a lot of people that adopt, they want to adopt a baby, an infant, so that they can raise it as their own and raise it under your rules. And then you get a 10-year-old that's already kind of adapted to the world, that's older, and you kind of have the pushback because they're like, I know my mom, you're not her, and kind of like that. So I find that an interesting part of your testimony as well, since so many people don't adopt older children, and your family did. So I just find it's heartbreaking, obviously because you guys love John Rudy and he was your son and your family, but it's like the redeeming love of God is just so amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. And you said this the other day, I might be stealing your thunder, but you said, for God so loved John Rudy that he gave his only son, and like if we have that in mind, like he does that for all of us.
Yes.
It's
bittersweet because it's a beautiful story of how much God loves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to write a book about it, and that's one of the things, for God so loved John Rudy that he never stopped pursuing the heart of that precious child. And so we have I don't know how to say it, but we can look back and we can see, and in light of that, it helps in our grief. Going back to taking a 10-year-old, if I wouldn't have been in the Word and praying and open to what God desired for our family, I mean, it's got to, but if we wouldn't have been at that place of surrender in our lives, I would have never been willing to take in a 10-year-old child. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A 10-year-old boy. And I never thought till you just said that about how what I feared actually kind of happened.
Yeah, it's almost like it was like a lesson for you almost in a way, like God, I don't know, just like God, maybe God's sense of humor, just like
the thing you don't want to do is the thing that he calls you to.
Yeah, and then you end up falling in love with what he gave you. It's not your idea, wasn't what you planned out for yourself.
Yeah.
But you felt instantly. You're saying as soon as you met him, you fell in love with John Rudy.
Yeah.
So it's like his plan for our lives is always better than the plan that we have for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So just a couple more questions. I'm just curious. I know that going through grief, I just recently lost my grandpa. It's my first real big loss, and I know that going through grief, it can really affect your relationship with God and with each other as well. So I'm just curious how you feel about and I think it's hard too, for my grandpa, he was he lived his life, he was pretty old, so it's kind of we were able to prepare for that moment, but for John Rudy, he was in his 20s, he was young, and you had just reconciled this relationship with him, and you had all these big visions and dreams for his life. So God taking that away from you, I'm just curious how that affected your relationship with God.
So just like I had said, I thought God for sure was going to heal him. And of course I questioned God, but because I knew that God always took care of John Rudy, more than we could have ever provided for him. God always provided. The only thing was that he was actually John Rudy was in the midst of trying to get on a heart transplant list. And so, of course, we're why, we should have got that sooner, that should have been done, and, all of this, and get to this point where it's not they wouldn't even see him as a person that would be a good candidate for that. Yeah, so that I had a little bit of a hard time with, thinking that God knew, his heart was failing that bad. But I think we all have a choice to either push God away, and that didn't work very well for me when I pushed John Rudy away. So I mean, what other choice did I have but to trust God? Like, if I curse God, then where does that leave me? And I thank God, because I saw his hand in all of it, and I could look back, and he had prepared us, and he was so like merciful and so sweet to like, he knew all the problems or the things that I was going to be thinking, all the failures that I was going to feel. He knew that I would like beat myself up, and for all the things that I didn't do right, that he gave me all those, remember when he got saved? Remember this, remember how he knew that you always said you were sorry, because like in his heart, he knew that, you loved him. And I think that allowed me more easily to go just press into God. Like I just pressed into him, and I just wrote stuff out, and I read scripture and anything I could get my hands on to help me. Like, number one, I mean, I was grieving, but I did not want to like push God. And so I had podcasts and things like that I would listen to that would help me to keep my eyes focused on the one who knows.
Yeah, I think that's really important, just to like not let your mind go to all these other places, and to fill it with things. Like your mind, you're going to think things, and you have to put good things in there and renew your mind, and think on I forget the exact scripture, but it's like, think on these things, and it lists like all of these like good virtues to think on, and it's like just consistently reminding yourself of those things. So if you could say something to anybody out there, a mom or someone that's adopting, or somebody that's dealing with something very similar to you, to help them, what would you say to them?
I would say to them to, first off, to do the hard thing. Like if you feel called to do something, or there's something that seems like it's way too big for you to do, like you're forgetting. You're forgetting who your God is. And our family would have missed out on a beautiful treasure if we would not have been open to that. So first off, I would say, do the hard thing, no matter what you think, because God is in the impossible, right? And then I would also just say, if you are struggling or having a hard time in relationships with your children or family, I wish we would have reached out for more counseling or something. I think we still are in the mindset, I don't want to say maybe I trust God too much, but sometimes I think it'll be fine. So we did take John Rudy to counseling, but maybe he needed more of things that we couldn't fix. So it's not a bad thing to get help or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate just the vulnerability of you coming on here. I know it's like I'm asking you to talk about probably like one of the worst things that you've ever had to go through. So I just appreciate that you're being so brave and courageous to come on here and share this. And I just know my bottom of my heart that like there will be people out in the world all over the place that are gonna like benefit from your story and John Rudy's story. And like John Rudy may not be here anymore, and he may have struggled with his relationship with God his whole life, but like his story is gonna like impact people. Yeah. I just believe that from the bottom of my heart. Yeah. It's just an honor to have you on here and everything. And so thank you for coming. And
honor to be here. My fourth grade student. It's so cool. I'm so proud of you and all that you're.
It's like watch me grow up,
doing.
Basically.
Yes.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of the Dare to Love podcast. I hope it blessed you and challenged you. Make sure you visit the description below for all our helpful links. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content from us. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook so you can stay updated with everything we have going on. And we'll see you next week for an all-new episode of the Dare You to Love podcast.